For centuries, the scorching frontier where the Arabian desert crashes into the warm, shallow waters of the Persian Gulf was a place that demanded absolute submission. It was not a landscape that invited ambition. It was a landscape that punished it. Ancient Bedouin tribes, hardened by generations of relentless sun and suffocating heat, understood this with the deepest bone-level wisdom. They gazed at the vast, empty shoreline of what would one day become Dubai, and saw exactly what it was. A wasteland of blistering white sand, where the scalding air could kill a man by midday, and the tides rose and fell over shallow coral beds with the indifferent rhythm of a geological clock. Pearl divers plunged into those treacherous waters armed with nothing more than a crude nose clip and a weighted rope, surfacing with aching lungs and bloodshot eyes, knowing that one wrong current, one hungry shark, one failed breath could end their fragile existence in an instant. For thousands of years, the Gulf Coast was not a place to build an empire. It was a place where empires came to be forgotten, their bones bleached clean by the unforgiving sun and buried by the slow, creeping tide. Every shred of reason, every ounce of geological common sense screamed a single, unmistakable warning. You do not manufacture sovereign territory from the open sea. The financial recklessness, the ecological devastation, the sheer thermodynamic absurdity of forcing solid ground to exist where only salt water and shifting sand belong, is a calculation that no rational mind should ever entertain. Yet consumed by the intoxicating fever of limitless oil wealth and an insatiable, almost pathological hunger to imprint their name onto the surface of the planet, the rulers of a tiny desert emirate decided that the laws of nature were merely suggestions. They chose to violently rearrange the floor of the Persian Gulf, suffocate an ancient marine ecosystem under hundreds of millions of tons of dredged sand, and fabricate an archipelago of 300 artificial islands, meticulously shaped into the map of the entire world. They would call it, with breathtaking audacity, the world. This is the story of how the state-backed developer Nakheel and the Emirate of Dubai waged an unprecedented assault on the Persian Gulf itself, funneled billions upon billions of dollars into the open sea, and erected a miniature planet of sand where absolutely nothing was designed to exist, only to discover that the ocean possesses a memory far longer and far more ruthless than any human balance sheet. To truly grasp the staggering recklessness and the colossal dimensions of this endeavor, you must first understand the battlefield. Before the dredging ships arrived, the waters off the coast of Dubai were a deceptive, shimmering expanse of warm, shallow sea. Do not mistake the calmness for hospitality. The Persian Gulf is one of the most geologically volatile and environmentally extreme bodies of water on Earth. Summer surface temperatures routinely exceed 35 degrees Celsius, turning the shallow waters into a suffocating thermal bath that stresses every living organism within it. The seabed is a treacherous carpet of fine, loose sediment, ancient coral formations, and pockets of unstable, silty clay. Despite its shallow average depth, rarely exceeding 35 meters near the coast, the Gulf is ruled by powerful tidal currents, unpredictable shamal winds that blow walls of sand and salt at highway speeds, and a relentless, corrosive humidity that can reduce unprotected steel to a crumbling skeleton within months. Beneath the surface lay one of the last remaining ecosystems of natural coral reef. Seagrass meadows and oyster beds in the region, village ruins, ancient ruins, a fragile, ancient web of life that had taken millennia to establish itself. The environment was not an ally. It was a silent, patient predator, waiting for the first sign of human overreach. Why then would anyone commit to the absolute geological insanity of manufacturing an entire landmass in this hostile theater? The answer is rooted in a cocktail of strategic desperation and boundless vanity. Dubai, unlike its oil-rich neighbor Abu Dhabi, was rapidly burning through its limited petroleum reserves. The ruling Al Maktoum family understood a terrifying truth. Their oil would run dry, and without a drastic, almost violent reinvention, their emirate would slide back into the obscurity of the desert. The solution was to transform Dubai into the ultimate global destination for the ultra-wealthy, a glittering monument to luxury, tourism, and foreign investment. But there was a brutal physical problem. Dubai possessed only 72 kilometers of natural coastline, a pitiful, suffocating bottleneck for a city that needed to attract the richest human beings on the planet with beachfront real estate. The equation was simple and savage. If you cannot find more coast, you must manufacture it. You must steal territory directly from the sea. The instrument of this theft was not a scalpel. It was a sledgehammer of unprecedented proportions. The tool required to vanquish the Persian Gulf was an armada of the most colossal dredging vessels ever deployed on a single project. Dutch engineering giants Van Oord and Boskalis were summoned, bringing with them a fleet of monstrous trailing suction hopper dredgers, mechanical titans that dragged themselves across the seafloor, their gigantic suction heads ripping sand and sediment from the ancient seabed, like vacuum cleaners the size of cargo ships. The critical assault technique was called rainbowing. These dredging leviathans would position themselves near the construction zone, and through high-pressure nozzles, violently eject the dredged sand into the sky in a massive parabolic arc, a fan of wet sediment spraying hundreds of meters through the air, before crashing down into the Gulf in the precise location dictated by advanced differential global positioning systems. They were literally painting a map of the world onto the surface of the ocean, and the raw, terrifying power of industrial hydraulics. Once the sand settled, massive vibrating probes were driven deep into the newly formed mounds in a process called vibrocompaction, shaking billions of individual grains into a denser, more stable configuration, attempting to forge solid ground from what was essentially an underwater sandcastle. The sheer volume of material consumed by this operation shatters comprehension. 321 million cubic meters of sand were violently extracted from the floor of the Persian Gulf and relocated. To shield this fragile archipelago from the open sea, a colossal oval-shaped breakwater stretching 27 kilometers in circumference was constructed from 34 million tons of quarried rock. If you lined up the rock used in that breakwater alone, it would create a wall stretching from Dubai to the far side of the Australian continent. The archipelago itself sprawled across 9 kilometers in length and 6 kilometers in width, sitting approximately 4 kilometers off the coast, a constellation of 300 sculpted sand islands, arranged in the unmistakable silhouette of a world map. It was visible from space. It was designed to be the most exclusive address on the face of the planet, a private kingdom where billionaires could purchase entire countries, entire continents of sand for the price of a modest European estate. It was the ultimate monument to the belief that enough money can override the fundamental laws of geophysics. The initial phase was a euphoric detonation of capital and ambition. When construction roared to life in 2003, the scale of the operation was a global spectacle. Satellite images from NASA captivated the world, showing the ghostly outline of continents slowly materializing in the turquoise waters. Early land sales were frenzied, hysterical, almost violent in their intensity. Plots representing the islands of Ireland, Greenland, and entire swaths of South America were purchased by celebrity investors, royal families, and multinational corporations. Billions of dollars poured into the project. The breakwater was officially and finally sealed. The final rock laid ceremoniously in January of 2008. The world map was physically complete, floating impossibly on the surface of the Gulf. The developers projected a fully built-out paradise of luxury villas, boutique hotels, and private estates. It was the absolute pinnacle of Dubai's golden age, the crowning jewel of a city that believed it could buy immortality. But the catastrophe was already gestating beneath the surface. And when it struck with the double-fisted brutality of economic annihilation and geological revenge. In late 2008, the global financial crisis detonated, like a bomb directly underneath Dubai's debt-fueled miracle. The real estate market, the very engine of the Emirates' survival, evaporated overnight. Property values plummeted by more than 50% in months. The parent company, Dubai World, staggered under the crushing weight of approximately $49 billion in combined liabilities. In November of 2009, the government of Dubai sent shockwaves through international markets by announcing that Dubai World would seek a standstill on $26 billion of its debt obligations, an event that rattled global stock exchanges and obliterated the myth of Dubai's invincibility. The emirate teetered on the edge of sovereign default, only to be dragged back from the abyss by a $20 billion emergency rescue package, funded largely by its wealthier neighbor, Abu Dhabi. And while the financial lifeblood drained from the project, the physical reality on the ground, or rather on the sand, was even more horrifying. With no development activity to stabilize and maintain the islands, the unfinished sand mounds were left completely exposed village to the raw fury of the Persian Gulf. The ocean, patient and indifferent, began its long-awaited counter-assault. Without hardened structures, retaining walls, or vegetation to anchor the sand, the islands began to slowly, silently dissolve. Wave action chewed at the unprotected shorelines. Tidal currents dragged sediment from the carefully sculpted edges and deposited it into the navigational channels between the islands, slowly and effectively silting them completely shut. In 2010, the marine logistics company Penguin Marine presented evidence to a tribunal village, alleging that the islands were materially eroding and sinking back into the Persian Gulf, that the channels were becoming impassable, and that the entire archipelago was physically degrading. Nakheel furiously denied it, but the damage was done. The global narrative shifted from wonder to horror. Satellite imagery seemed to confirm what the ocean already knew. Sand that is stolen will eventually find its way home. Meanwhile, beneath the glossy surface of the promotional brochures, a silent ecological catastrophe had already been executed and largely buried. The massive dredging operations had annihilated vast tracts of natural coral reef, smothered ancient seagrass beds, and obliterated oyster colonies that had existed for millennia. The sediment plumes generated during construction had darkened the water for miles, blocking the sunlight that coral desperately needs to survive. The physical presence of the islands themselves permanently altered the natural current patterns of the coastal zone, creating pockets of stagnant, oxygen-depleted water. An entire marine ecosystem, a living, breathing entity that took nature thousands of years to construct, was sacrificed in approximately 5 years for the privilege of drawing a world map in the sand. And the blood price, though carefully obscured from the glossy marketing materials, was paid in sweat, suffering, and silence. The construction boom that made Dubai's skyline and its artificial islands possible was built overwhelmingly on the backs of hundreds of thousands of migrant workers, primarily from South Asia. They toiled under the punishing, suffocating Gulf sun, where summer temperatures routinely exceed 50 degrees Celsius, operating heavy machinery on exposed, shadeless sand platforms, in conditions that international human rights organizations consistently described as exploitative. The kafala sponsorship system bound workers to their employers, confiscating passports and severely restricting their ability to leave. Reports from Human Rights Watch documented systemic wage theft, overcrowded labor camps. And a culture of silence around workplace injuries and heat-related fatalities. The precise death toll on the artificial island projects has never been transparently disclosed. What is known is that the magnificent sand map floating in the Gulf was forged, in no small part, by the invisible labor of men who had no voice and no choice. Fast forward to the present day. The world islands still float in the Persian Gulf, their unmistakable silhouette still visible from the sky. But the reality on the surface is a haunting study in arrested ambition. After more than 2 decades since the project was first announced, the vast majority of the 300 islands remain completely empty, barren humps of sand baking under the Arabian sun, with no structures, no inhabitants, and no immediate future. A handful of isolated developments have broken through the stagnation. The Anantara World Islands Resort opened its doors. The Heart of Europe project, developed by the Kleindienst Group, has slowly erected themed luxury hotels on a small cluster of islands. The Heart of Europe project, developed by the Kleindienst Group, but these pockets of activity are isolated outposts in an ocean of abandonment. Each operational island must function as a completely self-sustaining entity, generating its own electricity, treating its own sewage, desalinating its own water, and relying entirely on private marine transport for every human being and every supply shipment. There is no bridge. There is no municipal grid. Every single day, the relentless Gulf currents nibble at the unprotected edges of the undeveloped islands, slowly, patiently redistributing the stolen sand back to where it originated. Beach nourishment and dredging operations must be continuously repeated, an exhausting, expensive cycle of replacing what the ocean takes back every single night. The Megaproject exists now in a state of suspended decay. To the marketing departments that still promote it, the world islands represent the ultimate frontier in luxury living, an exclusive, unparalleled retreat for the global elite. But to the coastal engineers and marine geologists who study it, It is a fragile, artificial formation, engaged in a slow, losing negotiation with the thermodynamics of the ocean. It is a constellation of borrowed sand surrounded by a crumbling breakwater, sitting in a body of water that is warming and rising with every passing year due to climate change. A ticking clock that no amount of promotional photography can make disappear. The grand ambition of manufacturing geography, of literally redrawing the map of the planet with industrial machinery and limitless capital, will always collide with a fundamental, inescapable reality. Sand remembers where it came from. Water remembers where it flowed. The seabed remembers every scar that was torn into its surface. You can mobilize the most powerful dredging fleet ever assembled. You can spend fortunes that dwarf the economies of entire nations. And you can sculpt the outline of every continent onto the face of the ocean. But the moment you turn your back, the moment the money dries up or the machinery falls silent, the ocean begins its quiet, methodical work of erasure. Because buried beneath every manufactured shoreline and every imported grain of compacted sand, there exists a silent, relentless confrontation. A confrontation between the human compulsion to reshape the surface of the earth, the ancient, patient physics of water and wind conspiring to undo it all, and the staggering, often invisible toll exacted on those caught between the ambition and the reckoning.